Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. Now the absolutely overriding aim in this presentation is to get you to earn marks in your introductions. When time is so precious in that exam hall, it seems criminal to be writing and not earning marks. So let's see how this can be done, and I'll do it by using different past questions. You could usefully focus on a concept or key term in the question. Look at this past question and the guidance given to examiners in the mark scheme. You'll see that the question was set up with the opportunity for an introduction that earns marks by picking up on the central concept of ideology. Now I've done a presentation on making use of concepts. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. But here's the question. Widespread support for the ideology of authoritarian or single-party leaders was the most important factor in their rise to power. With reference to two leaders, each chosen from a different region, to what extent do you agree with this statement? And here's what the mark scheme tells the examiners to look for. Candidates could, at the outset, provide a working definition of the term ideology. For example, in order to identify the main beliefs, social, economic or political, of the chosen leaders. Now in doing this, you will be immediately earning marks. Here's another question. With reference to two authoritarian single-party leaders, each chosen from a different region, to what extent was complete totalitarian rule difficult to achieve? Define what is meant by totalitarian rule. And you then have a yardstick from which to measure from throughout the body of your essay, and of course your conclusion. And again, you'll immediately be earning marks. Another question. Changes to the role and status of women as a result of war were limited. Discuss with reference to two wars, each from a different region. Now here are two things that could be explained in your intro. Role and status, and how they are different and yet link. And you could point out and develop in the body of your essay how women are not a homogeneous group. Rather, there are many different types of women, from the elites, from the working class, from rural society and urban society, different generations, different religions, different races, living in different political systems, etc., etc., etc. Now, two questions from paper 3 that are useful because the use of key terms is perhaps not always so clear. Lenin's foreign relations were motivated by practical concerns and not ideology. Discuss. Here, your introduction could purposefully explain the difference between practical and ideology in this context. And the other question from paper 3. Evaluate the success of Hitler's domestic policies between 1933 and 1939. Here, you can purposefully define the terms of success in your intro. Successful for different groups in society, or for Hitler and the Nazis. Another way to immediately earn marks is to set the context of the question, or your answer to it. Look at this question. To what extent was the failure to maintain collective security after 1930 the most significant cause of the Second World War? you need to compare before 1930 with the period after 1930. So, an introduction that gives a brief overview of the end of World War I, the armistice and the peace terms, perhaps 1923 too, for before 1930, as well as the Great Depression for after, sets up your answer nicely. You can then argue that collective security was already struggling in the 1920s, and World War II was a result of World War I, with a counter-argument that the Great Depression was a key factor with both Hitler and Japan. Though of course you could alternatively usefully define collective security in your introduction. There's no one way to answer a question and get a top grade. You can also use the introductions to more or less set out your essay plan by highlighting the key arguments or different perspectives, outlining your approach in the process. For this first question, with reference to the period 1919 to 1939, analyse the factors which hindered the maintenance of international peace, the answer actually lies in the context. The peace treaties after World War I, the work of the League, the rise of authoritarian states and the Great Depression are all incredibly important context and offer an explanation for why peace didn't last. And your introduction then sets up paragraphs on Mussolini, Hitler, Japan and others, all wanting to revise the treaties, seen in the issues the League had to deal with in the 1920s as well as the 1930s, followed by a focus on the foreign policies, the principles behind them, as well as examples of what they did of Mussolini, Hitler and Japan, and then the collapse of the post-World War I order as a result of the Great Depression and as a result of appeasement. And if I can refer back to another presentation again, show how these different factors link. Now look at this second question. To what extent did two single-party rulers, each chosen from a different region, fulfill the promises made during their rise to power? Of course, how you answer will depend on the single-party rulers you choose, but you could present two perspectives in your introduction. Did they fulfill the promises made to themselves, their party, the principles of their ideology, or to different groups within the countries they governed, different classes, for example, or to women? You might also choose to define the parameters or limits to your answer. You can't cover everything in an answer, so set out and explain, always explain, your choices. Consider this past question. Analyse the methods used and the conditions which helped in the rise to power of one ruler of a single-party state. In dealing with the rise to power of Hitler, does it end when he becomes Chancellor, or when he becomes Führer and merges the offices of Chancellor and President after Hindenburg's death? There isn't a wrong or right answer, but you could usefully set your endpoint in your introduction. Here's a very different question that could benefit from clear parameters. Evaluate the impact of social policies in two authoritarian states. Impact on what social policies? On the economic well-being of people? On their freedoms? On this group or that group? On women? On minorities? Or on consolidating power or helping foreign policy? Lots of directions to take, and you can say this in your introduction and then make your direction clear. You might also want to set your own demarcation to long-term or short-term causes, or short-term and long-term effects. For example, from paper 3, evaluate the importance of the long and short-term causes of the First World War. Where is your demarcation line? Say so and explain why in your introduction. And you might want to introduce long and short-term causes or effects for that matter into your response to a question that doesn't instruct you to do so, in order to give your response a more analytical approach. That's fine, but in your intro, set out your demarcation line and explain why you adopt this approach. For example, staying with paper 3, with reference to any two European countries, compare and contrast the impact on women of the First World War. You might want to distinguish between immediate, that is wartime impact, and longer term impact. So, introductions for you. Try to earn marks from the get-go. I know it's easy for me and much harder for you, as it's you that faces the exam. But if you give this presentation some thought, perhaps watch it again as part of your exam preparation, it might well help you. Every mark counts. Now, as I always remind you in these skills videos, I may still have a tutorial slot available if you are interested in that. If that's the case, just get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com and we'll see if we can sort something out. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.